The thing about it is there's kind of an army of people that love Dickinson because it's almost like a kind of movement in a way. And I think one of the things that attracted me to it too was that in the times that we live in right now, someone who speaks so powerfully about lack of orthodoxy and about the feminine, the transcendence is expressed in the feminine, I think is a very, very healthy thing for us right now. And so I loved it. And then, the other thing that happens, Jason, is that sometimes when you immerse yourself in somebody's life and you read and you read and you read, you begin to think it feels as if you are actually with them. And I've come to feel that way a bit about Emily, that I think that she'd be happy with what I'm doing.
Welcome to Curious Goldfish, a podcast community where music and curiosity come together through interesting conversations with the music makers of our world. I'm your host, Jason English. You can find Curious Goldfish on all the major podcast and social media platforms, and of course, we have all of our content on our website, curiousgoldfish.com. Welcome back to Curious Goldfish. Today I'm featuring a conversation I had with Hall of Fame songwriter Marcus Hummon. You probably know him from his massive songs. He's the one who helped write Bless the Broken Road, made popular by Rascal Flatts, and of course Cowboy Take Me Away by the Chicks. They are huge, iconic country hits that everybody knows. But what I realize now, after speaking with Marcus, is calling him just a Nashville songwriter doesn't do him justice. He's like this complete musical creative powerhouse. He's out here composing full-blown operas and musicals and serious theatrical pieces. He's a complete Renaissance man who just happens to keep the lights on by writing 3-minute country smashes. His latest project is a truly unique album called Songs for Emily. He literally took the poems of Emily Dickinson and set them to music. So he's got a co-writing credit with a 19th century recluse who wrote only for herself. We got into how different the process is when he's writing a tight country song versus scoring an entire 2-hour stage show. He talked about that pure magic in songwriting. You know, those super rare moments where the song just pours out, like what happened on Cowboy Take Me Away. Seriously, hearing his perspective on art and creativity and how the broken stuff in life, the detours, the hard questions, all feeds into the greatest art. It's just human stuff, and I think you're going to love it. So now from Nashville, Tennessee, here's Marcus Hummon. Let's dive in. I appreciate your time. It's an honor. So there's so many things I could talk about, but I want to start here with not like mutual friends, but mutual acquaintances. So this little podcast that I have, I've talked to a number of really cool people, and your name has come up twice in the last 6 weeks with 2 different artists.
Okay.
So my most recent episode at the time of taping here is with the gentleman, fellow Hall of Famer in Nashville Songwriter Hall of Fame, Roger Murrah. Roger Murrah.
Oh wow, you interviewed Roger.
Yeah, that was incredible. I met him in August, and so I think you guys wrote a song together that Winona recorded.
Yeah, that's actually the first song that I ever had that went to #1 on a chart, and it's kind of probably one of the reasons I really kind of got to stay in Nashville is that, when that happened, that it sort of changed everything. Yeah. And I got to play on the record too because I used an open tuning for it, and it has kind of it's basically written in 2 harmonic centers, but it's really just an open D major kind of tuning kind of thing. But the producer, they called me and they said, he said, "Are you using an open tuning?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you have a good guitar?" And I was like, "I do." And he said, "Well, come on down to the studio." So I had my first major master session. I did demos prior to that, but it was on Only Love, and I'm the acoustic guitar player on it. And I was so nervous. I'm almost apoplectic, I was so scared because it was my big break, and I figured if they got me playing guitar, what if I screw it up, then I'm going to ruin the cut, and all that. But it all worked out.
That's awesome. Oh, that's great. And then the second artist I also interviewed in Nashville, give or take about 6 weeks ago. So I'm based here in Georgia, a Georgia band called the band Lula.
Oh, of course, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. So
that's
they were awesome, and they actually performed a song that you co-wrote with them called "I Love Levers," I
I
think.
love Beavers. Yeah.
Yeah, which is great. So that was awesome to meet them, and they gave you a little shout out before they played it. So
Well, that's
the fact that I'm talking to you now, and again, I know the music is a little bit of a small world, but for a little podcaster like me, it's cool to have the mutual connections.
well, they're very special. Logan and Malachi are. I mean, the very first time I ever heard them do anything, I was like, I remember telling my publisher at the time, a couple of years back or so, and I said, I have to write with these guys. This is exactly the kind of thing that you know that I'm waiting around for, as far as with regards to writing with people. That's
Hmm.
been, as it turns out, that's actually been the part of my life that is, made money and helped, keep me in town. And so I always really look for, special voices, and the bluesiness, their bluesy thing. It's not. In fact, it's interesting thinking about Winona. Those two things. She's sort of the most bluesy alto I've heard since Winona. I mean, they're both soul. There's a connection there. They're both soul singers in many ways, as well as being country singers, and that's somewhere in that land of soul and folk are my favorite things.
Awesome. Yeah. That,
Hawkeye's great too.
thanks for sharing that. Yeah. They were great. They were a great conversation, and I haven't published that one yet, but hopefully soon. So I definitely want to talk about the album that you've put out there this year called Songs for Emily, the album, which is inspired by the poetry of Emily Dickinson, which
Yes.
is so cool. I mean, did you ever think about, when you were driving from LA in that 59 Saab, that you'd share writing credits with Emily Dickinson? It's crazy, right?
You have done your research. How do you know about my sob? How do you know about the sob? Nobody knows about the sob.
It's out there. I don't know what to
It's
tell
out
you.
there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway,
Uh,
like it's kind of cool that you have writing credit with, Dickinson.
well,
I mean, come on.
yeah. Well, she doesn't have a choice, does she? That's the only thing. I mean, I could feel prouder of it if it weren't about 170 years in the public domain. But and it's kind of interesting. There is a part of her poetry that wasn't published actually until I think the 70s or 80s. Believe it or not, 1970s or 80s, and so that you can't use that poetry. But of course, I went with all the, I was looking at it from the standpoint of, of the 1800 poems they found when she died, or nearly 1800. I've sort of familiarized myself probably with in the area of 200, I would say, and then just kind of got it down to the 10 that I just felt most connected to. But there are others that I love. And there's a lot of poetry of hers I have no earthly idea what she's talking about. Which,
What do you think about her did you feel connected to? Why her?
well, I well the reason I mean technically the reason or the organic quality of it was that a friend of mine who ran Nashville Shakespeare for many many years, Denise Hicks here in town, and Shakespeare in the Park and so forth. Um, just somebody I've known for years. She retired and then she wanted to do a one woman Emily Dickinson show. And she just had asked me, she said, would you take this one poem called I Dwell in Possibilities? Oddly enough, a poem I did know. And would you set it to music? And she knew that I like to set music, poetry to music, because one of the shows I read a lot of theater and a little bit of well, I mean, four operas. I mean, it sounds really fancy, but it's what it really means is through composed work, technically opera. And I've worked twice with the Nashville Opera Company, but it isn't, it isn't 18th century Italian. It's not. But it's my kind of music, except that I do have singers that have 2.5 octaves or something to work with, so that's fun. But one of the ones that I had worked, the first opera I ever did was a piece called Surrender Road. It's about 15 years ago, maybe. and it was in this. It was a story of a boxer, but a lot of the beats in it, it's kind of an American, boxer story, which is really like a genre, Rocky and so forth. And but people simply sang rather in Shakespeare. So you'd be moving along, and then all of a sudden there would come this point, and it'd be like, what will you do tomorrow? And it'd be like, and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day, and and then I had a quintet strings that Andrea Zahn arranged. So anytime that the opera was written for piano, string quintet, and a saxophone. And so anytime you heard Shakespeare, you got these sort of Baroque arrangements. Anyway, Denise knew all that, so I happily dove in. And then once I got into it, I just kind of went down a rabbit hole, which I'm kind of, that's I'm want to do. I've had projects like Frederick Douglass and a Jim Thorpe musical. I'm still working on both, if you can believe it, after 10, 15 years. But once I got interested in Emily, and I knew her from college. I wrote for Williams College Review, and I studied poetry, and just happened to know a bit of her poetry and a little bit about her life. And my godson Matthew he teaches at Deerfield, so that's 12 minutes from Amherst. And anyway, so I just got fixated on it, and then I got a reading list from Matthew and his wife Hadley and some different people that are real, Dickinson aficionados. And the thing about it is, there's kind of an army of people that love Dickinson because it's almost like a kind of movement in a way. And I think one of the things that attracted me to it too was that in the times that we live in right now, someone who speaks so powerfully about lack of orthodoxy and about the feminine, and the transcendence is expressed in the feminine. I think is a very, very healthy thing for us right now. And so I loved it. And then, the other thing that happens, Jason, is that sometimes when you immerse yourself in somebody's life and you read and you read and you read, you begin to think it feels as if you are actually with them. And I've come to feel that way a bit about Emily, that I think that she'd be happy with what I'm doing. Um, and I think that she enjoys being remembered by different composers and thinkers and people who write about her and contemplate her life, but also go inside the language and then try to bring it out in your own contemporary way. I mean, the most famous of all the song cycles about Emily, it was done by Aaron Copland, the great 20th century American composer. But that's definitely classical, late 20th century, mid to late 20th century sounding. It's a particular sound. And of course, I wanted to do it in this other way. I wanted to do it in my own way,
Yeah.
which has this Americana quality, but sometimes drifts into the choral, the theatrical, and occasionally a little bit jazzy.
Does she remind you of your wife Becca at all?
Well, she does in terms of courage, and my wife is such a strong character and actually a very good poet. She's sort of laced a lot of her books with her poetry, and I think in some way too, some of her poetry, Becca's, my wife's poetry, has tended towards being almost like the movement transcendentalists that I believe Emily was really part of. There are a lot of different theories, and believe me, there are so many people and brilliant Emily Dickinson scholars, and I don't count myself among them, but I am beginning to have strong feelings, and I think of her as part of the transcendentalist movement in New England in the 19th century. And in that sense, I think too, my wife, her version of being Episcopalian pastor, and then her work in social justice around the world, I think it's very tied to the earth, and um, and I think she's most happy when she's in the wild, and
Right.
it speaks to her. So, and it certainly speaks to me.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on Dickinson. I
Yeah.
studied her in college, obviously, but and then just preparing for this interview, I got to know about your wife and all the cool stuff that she's into, and it's like, okay, like they kind of sound like they're two peas in a pod a little bit, just in terms of worldview and thinking. So I'm like, okay, maybe that's a connection. I was just curious if you
Yeah.
had thought about that.
Well, they could be. It's funny, like when we were reflecting earlier for your audience about strong female, feminine characters in music, and you'd mentioned, oh, Mindy and Emmylou and so forth. And I too have always been sort of attracted. I was attracted to strong women, and I
Hmm.
married the strongest, probably the strongest woman I know. I mean, in a way, as and again, as I understand strength.
Yeah.
But one of the things that is also very interesting and for some people kind of titillating about Emily, and part of what draws so many people in, and in a particular obsessive way, right, is the fact that in the last 20 years of her life, from approximately 1866 to 1886, um, she becomes what many refer to as the myth of Amherst. It's in those years that she never leaves the great family homestead, that she perpetually is seen. If she's seen at all, she's seen wearing white, and that she speaks from to guests come to the house, and she'll either not be present upstairs or she'll speak from behind doors. And she obviously, whether she was agoraphobic or there are a lot of different theories about what that's about, but that did happen, and that has brought on so much speculation about her life. Obviously there are many things, but that's very odd behavior, but it's also kind of powerful in a way, because it turns out, when she dies, very few people understood her as a writer. A few did, and no one, not even her closest companion, arguably her sister-in-law Sue, none of them knew how much she was writing. And of course, when she dies, they famously, her sister Lavinia opens a chest in her room and finds roughly 1,800 poems, including 40 packets of poems which she herself threaded together and which they refer to as fascicles. So somewhere in the 1860s, her most prolific era, she began to effectively publish herself, perhaps in the knowledge that in her lifetime it was not going to happen. And
Yeah.
one of my favorite poems is a poem I put to music and did with Darrell Scott, my good friend, a song called A Letter to the World. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me.
Hmm.
And that's such a beautiful but also heartbreaking poem, because whether she understands her own ailments, some kind of aspect of her predicament, she understands that she's not going to have this, this great regard, this fame in her lifetime. But I think from the poems and the fact that she did tie all these fascicles up and organize them herself, I think at some level, as a great student of literature, her love of Shakespeare, her love of the Bronte sisters, and on, she knew at some level, she knew she was doing unbelievable work, and
Yeah.
work like of another, for all the ages, as Ben Jonson said of Shakespeare. I think she knew she was in that. They say that for fun, she used to go up to this tower in her home and read Shakespeare aloud, like by candlelight, and so I'm thinking she had some idea that what she was doing was extraordinary. Anyway,
Well, you mentioned Darrell Scott in the song Letter to the World, and then you mentioned the song I Dwell in Possibility, which was a
yeah,
collaboration with Mary Chapin Carpenter. And then
yeah.
you also have the song with Sarah Evans, who I know you've worked with in the past. I guess, how did you pick those artists, and did they have to have the same sort of in-depth knowledge and appreciation of Emily to be sort of invited? How did those three come about?
Well, the Mary Chapin one was I had this show at the Arena Stage in D.C. 3 years ago called American Prophet, and it's really the closest I've come to Broadway, and it was a really big regional theater show. Like Arena is sort of the big one in the East Coast, and it's about the life of Frederick Douglass, and written with Charles Randolph Wright, wonderful poet, writer and director. Anyway, Mary Chapin Carpenter followed that show, and I knew that she was very literary, and I follow her on Instagram. See, not everything in the social media is bad, because I was following, and she would comment. There would be like a review from the Washington Post, and she wrote me, and I thought, she doesn't have to do that. We don't know each other. But obviously, when I was coming up, and about to put out records that were going to fail miserably, like I'm just the poster boy for record deals that don't work out. And there was Mary Chapin, who also had a weird, lived overseas, went to school in New England, very similar cultural background to mine. But she was, kicking ass and taking names, and with great records and Grammys, and I really admired her, and still do. Anyway, so she was just commenting, and so I just got this thought, I'll bet she's an Emily person.
That's
I'll bet,
awesome.
there's so many things about her that, and she strikes me as being a little bit reclusive too, and her farm in Virginia and everything. And so I thought, what's the worst that could happen? She's been so nice, and we've been back and forth a few times, and I'll just ask her. I mean, she says no or ignores me or unfriends me or whatever, that's fine. And she is just so generous, like as soon as I wrote her, she responded that she actually had a song that referenced I Dwell in Possibility, and that she's a huge Emily Dickinson fan.
Wow.
And so I sent her two or three of the pieces I was working on, including I Dwell, which originally I just did with myself, and then it has an almost choral ending, just moving parts basically. And we kind of went back and forth, and then I don't remember if it was her or I suggested, why don't we converse in Dickinson? Because, and this has been said by a lot of people, but a lot of the Dickinson poetry, I don't know, perhaps almost half or 40% is written in American hymn. It's a tetra, then a tri, tetra, and a tri. It's what Amazing Grace is. I'm trying to
Hmm.
think of the actual term for it, but the language, it basically hymns. So it's like Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. There's four, saved a wretch like me. Three, beat, right? I once was, and then it's because I could not stop for death. He kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves. So Emily was writing in American hymn form. And so we decided we would take two lines and then two lines. And that's really how we built it. And she didn't want to come to Nashville, or she wasn't coming to Nashville. I mean, I don't know if she didn't want to, but it wasn't like, that's a lot to ask on my
Right.
part. So I said, well, why don't I send you? I'll just sing the answer lines, and then at the end we'll just get all our voices together, and I'll put a few down, and you put a few down, and let's see what happens. So I sent her the files, and she was so sweet, about the whole thing. And then she wrote like a really nice quote, which I got to use in the press and for some other stuff. Yeah, it just generosity is I mean, really, she doesn't have to do any of that.
Right. No, totally.
Now, Darrell, on the other hand, he does have to do that because we've been friends for a long time. And, our kids know each other. I mean, his son takes care of the house when I've probably written with him longer than, anybody. And I also, by the way, think he's one of the best artists that I've known in my time in Nashville. Uh, I can't think of, I mean, he's up there with anybody, in that sort of
Hmm.
rarefied air as a writer, as a singer, uh, obviously as an instrumentalist. He's really a remarkable. But I also know about him that he's a deep thinker, and he's too is a journalism major like yourself, and did studied at Tufts University. And I also know that he's a closet theater guy. So like whenever I do recordings for transcription of all these plays, I mean, there's like 12 of them, right? Musical or opera, and I always have a character, and with a baritone that has he has a baritone with a lyric range, and then he's a natural. He's totally an actor. I mean,
That's
he's got
awesome.
He's so got it. And I actually got him to be in a play. I finally, it was right during the COVID period, so none of us are doing anything. And I had this show that I'd written called Favorite Son, which is a story of a high school football player going back to a reunion and all kinds of awful and fun and sort of terrible things. You realize that it's basically a portrait of mental health, but you don't know. But I have this character who is a lot like a coach that I had when I was in high school. He's kind of an amalgam of a couple different people who were really said some things that I never forgot. And anyway, and it's a religious school. It's Episcopal high school in Virginia that I set it at, and I had a character named Father Coach. And so because some of these teams you would play when I was playing high school ball, you'd play Georgetown Prep, the big Catholic school in our division, and man, they'd come out on the field and they'd get down on the knee and they'd bring a priest out, and he would bless the team. And they were really good football team, Georgetown Prep, and it's like it's one thing if you're gonna kick my whatever around, then you're gonna, but then to watch them pray over it, it was like, oh my God, this is so intense. So, and he was great in it. He was
Yeah.
he as you can imagine. He told me at one point, like in the rehearsals early on, he goes, "This is the most frightened I've been in years," because he's frightened by nothing.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
That's not a guy
Yeah.
that walks up on a stage and says, "Well, I'm just nervous about my guitar playing tonight." No.
No. Well, I happened to be at Americana Fest this year where he was awarded, I think, a
Oh,
Lifetime Achievement Award
yeah, that
at the
was great.
Ryman. That was a great moment. Yeah,
Yeah,
and he had
I
such
watched it.
like the best remarks. It was just so classy.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, well,
Well,
cool. Well, I do
yeah,
have. So thanks for that. So Songs for Emily, the album.
yeah.
Do you have any other plans to expand the Dickinson mojo beyond the album?
I do. I'm trying to discover it. A lot of times for me in the world, particularly of these other projects that become theater or whatever, it's I don't really force myself onto things exactly, but when I'm in the spin of it, with feeling the passion for it, I look for an opportunity, and you know, I do have I am transcribing the work. So the voices, there's a little bit of 4-part harmony as well. And once you have it, once it's transcribed, my piano and guitar. Most of the things I wrote on piano. Most of them are. This was more of a piano project, but there's a little bit of guitar too. And once you have it in digital form, you can then change the key at just push a button. And I've got a couple. I've got one particular guy who's just a brilliant transcriber. I've used him for lots of shows. So once I have that, I can take that to the folks I work with. Just most recently are the folks at Belmont University, which now has just one of the best music theater departments, and it's been expanding and expanding. And their dance program is great, and the vocal program, and they have a doctoral program in orchestration. So we are beginning to, the dean of music and I and others are beginning to talk about some kind of evening of Dickinson, and where I would not be singing. I'd probably be playing maybe, but nonetheless, there'll be, I would imagine, orchestration and various singers. In the midst of that, I have actually written a play that threads the song cycle. So I've got 9 songs from the 10, and I've threaded a play called The Oculist. And right now I'm having it looked at by a couple of dramaturgs. I just want to see what they think. And then a couple of friends of mine too who are Emily, like people that know a great deal about Emily. So I want them to get a sense for, if I've taken too many liberties or not.
All right. Well, that's incredible. The fact that you're even putting yourself out there and going into such a just an unorthodox arena for someone that's known as a Nashville songwriter and artist. I think that's the coolest thing. So that's awesome. I do have a couple of other questions. Sort of the Songs for Emily album is a little bit of an example. You mentioned the opera work. You've mentioned the musicals.
Yeah.
Is your process for storytelling and putting words on paper different when it's a 3 minute country pop song versus a 2 to 3 hour project or
Yeah.
performance?
Well, there are similarities and there are differences. I mean, in the just to break that question down a little bit, from the standpoint of the 3 minute song idea, um, always finds its way and has really, since Puccini was writing opera, there suddenly there'd be an aria, and lo and behold, it's roughly 3 minutes, and where somebody plants their feet and says something which they have to say, and these are the moments that a lot of people remember in theater. Uh, and so that still happens, like if you're writing a piece and your characters can get to a certain point, and eventually you end up with something that looks like a song. So there's that aspect. The song is still a fundamental building block. The other thing, though, is that it's more like the lost art of the story song. We don't write a lot of that. You don't hear a lot of that anymore. And it used to be that people would love to work in country music or folk too, because you could that's where you would do the story song, and to
Yeah.
blues to a certain extent, but definitely country. The Coward of the County, or I mean, there's just on and on and on. And I always had an interest in that kind of writing. I I think in terms of hits, the only one that comes closest to that would probably be One of These Days by Tim McGraw. The story of that, how that works, is kind of like a 3-act play, in that
Mm.
there's sort of two things that happen, and then there's a breaking moment where he creates a realization, and then there's what they call the downward, the denouement, or the downward moment of the how we finish the idea. Uh, that would be the closest I think I could make to that. I do like to, when I get involved in a show, once a show starts to happen in my mind, I try to remember that you can graph out some of the various plot points. That's very useful. But I really believe that one doesn't want to over intellectualize the process of writing. That once you're in the flow, you've got to let the flow happen. And if you think about it, if you start to intellectualize it too much, you're going to tell yourself you have no damn reason, you have no right to be doing any of this business. And I've had that feeling. And when I have that feeling, I close the computer, I put the piano, I step away, because that spirit of internal criticism or over intellectualizing of something is not useful. It is useful to do a lot of research. It is useful to saturate yourself with whatever these elements are, whether it's Frederick Douglass's life, his 3 autobiographies, his letters, Emily Dickinson, her letters, her love letters, her supposed love letters. I read as much of the poems as you can. And once that stuff's in your body and you've thought about all these characters, and if you're driven to write, then just start writing,
Mm.
because that's when it happens. I mean, and believe me, and I think any writer would tell you this: when you're really rolling, when it's just rolling, and you're not being critical, and I mean, not, what I'm saying, but like critical, like shut yourself down, critical.
Right.
Um, that's a beautiful time. That's the magic time.
Well,
Yeah,
so I was just about to ask this, and I was going to mention the word magic because when I
yeah,
talked to Roger Murrah a couple months ago, he talked about the fact that there's a lot of good songs in Nashville. Like
yeah.
the good songs aren't hard to find. Everybody's looking for the exceptional one, including him. And he pointed to the fact of like you know it when you know it when there's magic, And I guess can you define that, like based on your experience? Like for you, what is that magic?
I can't define it. I certainly can experience it, and um, and I look for it in my own work. I look for a feeling, and I look for it in other people too. Sometimes when I'm writing with other people, I look for those moments and that energy in the room. But it's rare. It's rare. And sometimes you don't even know. I mean, you don't know for sure. when it's happening. I mean, there are a couple situations where I did. I think when Marty and I wrote "Cowboy Take Me Away," as we were writing it, the writing of that song took about 15 minutes, and it came after like a long, laborious session of a song that was really no good. I mean, it was, it's okay, but it was not any good. And then she had said right before I had to leave, because another writer was coming, they were staying at these houses now. They started to sell millions of records, so Sony put them in these, like, you had to drive out of town and go through armed guard and all this. They each had a chateau, but I knew that this other Gary Burr was coming to write. And he was probably the most successful guy at that time. And I remember her saying to me, she was like fixing me lunch, like heating up some beans or something. And she said, I had this title. I was really wanting to write this other thing for you. I want to saved it for you. And it's a title for my sister's getting married. And I wanted to write this song that I would sing, or we would sing, Natalie and we'd sing at the wedding. And of course, I'm thinking, all the millions of records, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be inside the family. I'm going to be like their best friend. So I said, no, just tell me, what is it? And that's I tell this joke. It's a pretty common joke for me. It's a true story, but I thought she said, "Calgon, take me away." I actually did. And I was very disappointed. I thought we were going to be doing a parody or something. And then she finally cleared it up and said, no, she's marrying this guy, Charlie Robeson, who actually breaks horses and has a ranch, and country singer too. But what I remember about the write was, I had these lines in a book. I like a book. I write lyrics, and I'm not a title guy, but I write just lyrics, but I don't write titles. I'm not. Most people are title guys, and I had the lines. I want to touch the earth, break it in my hands, grow something wild and unruly. And she goes, and she just started playing. She had a mandolin, and she didn't usually play mandolin, and she just played that da 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 da. And it's like we spoke the damn song to each other. I promise you, it's exactly how it happened. It took almost no time, and it was just done, and that was it. And then I thought, that's it. And I went and did the demo. They were on the road. They didn't. I just did the demo and sent it to them, and nobody said anything about it, except they did sing it at the wedding. I saw that, and somebody said, "Oh, get a People magazine. There it is." And I was like, "Oh my God!" Well, there it was. There was the whole thing, right? And yeah, but of course I ended up being involved in. I wrote "Ready to Run" with her too, and then they
Right.
asked me to play my guitar, my open string thing on that. So I played the acoustic on that, and of course that record, the recording of "Ready to Run" is really, if you ever really listen to it, if you're just a student of this stuff, it's a great record. I mean, recording, and it won a Grammy for best single by a band or duo, whatever. And it was up for Song of the Year and lost that, um, but nobody told me. They kept it from me, and then the girls surprised me. The three sisters, I mean the two sisters and Natalie, they surprised me at the studio one day and asked me to come over and played. And
That's awesome.
and I heard Cowboy, and to this day, it's still one of my um, it's just one of my favorite recordings of anybody's. I mean, I don't mean that in a, I
Yeah.
could name a few others. I could name some other things that I've heard that I didn't write and didn't have anything to do with, that I just absolutely love. You know, in my time and my generation. But I'd put Cowboy right up there, because it's there. You talk about magical. I mean, it is magical, and Paul Worley tells me though that it wasn't. It sounds like everything was just sort of done in one take, one of those things. And he said it wasn't that. They really worked hard on it. Took a couple of days in the studio and worked hard on that long outro with Lloyd Maines playing that pedal steel against Marty's fiddle. That was a construction, and a beautiful one.
That's
Anyway,
awesome.
sorry, I just get
No, it's
blabbing.
great. No, yeah. So like that's a perfect example, I guess, of that magic that
Yeah,
I asked you about. So two more questions, if you don't
yeah.
mind, then I'll let you go. But so I think another song that has meant a lot in terms of magic and hope and inspiration, obviously, is "Bless the Broken Road,"
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That you wrote. I guess what's interesting about that I wanted to ask you about is it's a song that probably a lot of people will interpret based on their own context and their own life and their own situation and apply it to themselves. But
Hmm.
it's about lessons learned, right? And it's not all for naught, right? Whether you've had your heart broken or whatever, you can learn from it. And but the road is going to be what it is, and hopefully it'll end in a positive way. The journey of that song actually had its own road, because I know Rascal Flatts went big, and you won a Grammy for
Hmm.
that song.
Yeah.
But there was a number of people that had recorded it, and I
Yeah.
think it got a fair number of criticism right before it actually became what it became. Right? I guess can you talk about the similarities of the message of the song and like its actual
Well,
journey?
yeah, the broken road of the song is true, and and I don't know. There's so many ways to look at it. I mean, the song was written for the Dirt Band with Jeff Hanna of the Dirt Band, and at whose wedding I had just sung. I had sung "Only Love" at the wedding of him, and it was his second or third marriage, and Matresa Berg was her second marriage. And Matresa and I are buddies. I didn't know Jeff, but I was a big Dirt Band fan. And I kind of looked to the Dirt Band as a way that I would fit into Nashville, actually, because I had some of those elements, and I was trying to find a way. How will I fit into the city I love? I'm not that country, but I probably as country as the Dirt Band in a way, or I thought that's what I thought. So when I knew I was going to get to write with him, I wanted to have a good idea. I didn't want to just come in, just. And it just happened. I ended up having this conversation with this guy Bobby Boyd, and who was working for BMG where I was at the time, and eventually I think he's gone on to doing quite a bit of writing. And although he wasn't a writer, I mean he wasn't in the room when we worked on the song. He talked to me that night about a divorce that he was going through, and he had such a kind of inspirational, although it was sad, because he was saying different things he'd done he wished he hadn't, married young and a variety of things that happened, but he truly believed that this woman with whom he was having an affair, you know, and I'm saying this because it's all been in the press before. I'm not outing somebody because but it was very beautiful. But he believed that this was who God had wanted. This was his soulmate, and so he said. So I can't remember the exact phrase. Of course, it's been so many years. It was like 30 years ago or something. But he said something to the effect of, I just wouldn't change. As it turns out, I wouldn't change anything
Hmm.
because and that was the impetus for the song. And so he's also a writer on it because that's just how that is sometimes. And I experienced it from the standpoint of I was not in that kind of a relationship, but I believed it, thought of it as like an existential or theological thing, which is that the world is kind of, doors are opening actually all the time. And this is how I look at things, whether it's true or not. It's how I look at things, and that you can walk through those doors, and there's doors that you need to walk through, and there's other things you need to not. You can also destroy something really quickly, but grace being what it is, and forgiveness being what it is, which really trumps everything. This is always a possibility. Love is always a possibility, and grace always a possibility. But the funny thing initially was when I handed the song in the first demo, and it was a piano song, mind you. It's like it was very much what I brought to him was, it's very much that. And I did a demo, just a piano vocal, just me, and I took it to my publisher, and they were not crazy about it, because they liked it. They said it was a good song, but they didn't dig the whole God thing, like I was principally a country and pop writer, so having something that God bless the broken, they thought, well, this is evangelical or it's something kind of belongs to CCM, which was like death, right? And I was like, well, I mean, basically it's written in a bar. I mean, in a way, I mean, like you know, I don't know. It was kind of a funny thing, and I didn't think much of it. And then the Dirt Band did it, and I figured that was probably it. And but then it didn't go away. That was the thing about the song, even before Rascal Flats. And Jeff would attest to this as well, is that it was cut by Melody Crittenden. I did the actual first piano version on Columbia, but there were a lot of people sniffing around. And some people cut it and didn't put out. But I noticed that it was already beginning to generate income, though, as sheet music, because even before it became the big hit that it became, it was being picked up as wedding music. And of course, we had tapped into a zeitgeist, which is just that people love later. And if you get married in, like, say, your mid to late 20s, by the time you're mid to late 20s, in the way that we live life now, you've had a relationship or two of, if not a marriage, a damn near one, right? And then of course there are second marriages, there are third marriages. It's how we love. And if you're fortunate enough to be in a marriage that lasts, like I'm at 37 years now, and I know I'm fortunate. But I mean, any point along the way, there's lots of moments that could, life being, again, what it is. So I think we tapped into it without really thinking of it in those terms. And then, of course, once Flats did it, I mean, I remember the first time I heard that, their recording, because I'd come back from overseas with the family. We were in Africa, and I remember getting back, and I turned on the radio, and I heard it, and I was just like, oh my God. I mean, that is a really good record. Like, the way it was sung, it was produced, it wasn't overproduced, it was just, anyway, it was one of those, as the songwriters often talk about, that it was a pull off the road. I mean, I it, I can't put it any other way. And I'm still feeling it. I mean, it's the biggest song I've ever had, and it still pays the bills. I mean, it's still helping me eat.
Thank you for your time. I guess one last question. This little thing I'm doing is inspired by, a few different things, but primarily Ted Lasso, which is the show that I think is coming back for a season, fourth season, which is incredible. But
Incredible.
I think curiosity is obviously important in my life and in the business world and things like that. And you're probably the most curious person I've spoken with, just given all the ventures that you're in the past that you've taken. But I guess at this stage in your career, as a father and a husband and a musician and a songwriter, like, what are you most curious about?
Oh my God, that's such a huge question. I mean, I still am most curious about the eternal. I think, if I were honest, Emily Dickinson said, "I believe and I disbelieve 100 times, 100 times an hour," and in one of her letters. I don't know that I vacillate that much exactly, but I do think of the big questions, and that's probably still what I'm most curious about. And on an artistic level, I'm I'm always really fascinated by trying to find a chord progression that I dig. And I hunt for that stuff constantly, and particularly on piano. Because piano is the entire orchestra, at least in Western music, as we understand intervals. Uh, I just take so much pleasure in in just chasing down new melodies and harmonies that I haven't, that I haven't done exactly before. And part of that is because melodies and harmonies are actually, are emotional, have an emotional imprint. I had one opera. Um, my director, John Holmes, the director of Nashville Opera, he made a comment to me once. He said, the thing about through composing work, if you tell an entire evening story through music, and he says, as much as people think of operas as the penultimate expression of the human voice, like, what can the human voice do? He goes, the other way to look at it, though, is that music, because it has to carry the entire evening, that you have to begin to understand harmonics and chords and melodies as having so much character that the characters could just walk around the stage, do whatever they do, sing nothing, and the underscoring would tell you, you would know what the show was. And that always really has really struck, because when we'll think, like, if we say C minor, well, that's definitely sad. But what if we put a 2 and a 9, and like, you begin to think, like, well, what is that saying? And of course, it is saying something, but you have to really listen. and you have to be in touch with your own kind of spirit to hear it, to get to even find it. And that's a lifetime journey. That, like, I don't imagine that will. I hope I guess I hope I'll still be doing that. And if I don't know who I'll be. Don't even know who I would be.
All right. Well, thank you for that answer. That was awesome. Thank you.
That was journey, sorry.
And thanks for taking time out of your schedule to talk with me. Congrats.
Well, thanks for asking me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, congrats on the project and future projects, all the things. Hopefully you can get some of the other musicals and plays wrapped up, because those are going to be great. But yeah, Marcus, thanks for your time and thanks for all the music that you've given us.
Oh, well, thank you, and
So thank you.
hey, thanks for having me.
All right, cheers.